Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Growth Class. I'm Phil Masiello, your host. And as a business mechanic, I'm always looking for the real, unvarnished story of how a business operates and scales, especially when the CEO is thrust into the driver's seat by pure necessity rather than design. So, my guest today is Matt Warnock. Matt was an attorney, and as he says it, he's a recovering attorney with an MBA and absolutely zero experience in herbal medicine. But when personal tragedy and family illness struck, he had to step in to run operations, eventually becoming the CEO of RidgeCrest Herbals. He didn't just accept the industry at face value; he brought his trial lawyer skepticism with him, digging deep into pharmacology and challenging the one disease, one drug mindset of modern pharmaceuticals. So today, Ridgecrest is an industry-leading certified B Corp. Their Clear Lungs product is the #1 natural herbal lung supplement in the U.S. We're going to get into the operational hurdles of navigating incredibly strict FDA regulations, surviving fragile supply chain shocks during the pandemic and other times, and how building a sustainable, ethical business model is the ultimate driver of growth. So, Matt, welcome to the show. Thanks for taking the time to come on.
Thanks, Phil. Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
It's
I
a pleasure.
appreciate it. Yeah, you got an interesting background. Why don't you take us into the story of how you got to take over this company and what you do and how you do it?
Sure. So I had been a litigator in Silicon Valley for about 13 years and was not very happy with that. Being a litigator is a terrible way to make a living. I have described it as being the world's most expensive and uncertain way to move money from one pocket to another.
Yeah.
Um, I was definitely looking for some kind of a way out. I also had an MBA, so I was looking at business opportunities. My brother actually gave me an opportunity to step out of it, to step out of the practice of law and do some M&A work with him. And over the course of about 18 months, we did 5 different acquisitions for a public company out of Georgia. And at the end of that time, I was trying to figure out, okay, what's next? The, the company that we had been working for got raided by short traders, and their stock went from about 50 to 5 over the course of about 3 months. And so we recognized that that ride was over, and so the question was, what was next? Greg wanted to start a VC firm, and he did that. Greg's my brother. I was looking around, figuring out what I needed to do, and it was about that time that my mom was diagnosed with primary pulmonary hypertension as a result of having taken fen-phen. Fen-phen was a combination of weight loss drugs, both approved by the FDA, but never tested together. And together, they caused heart problems for about a third of the people that took it and probably wound up killing about 600,000 people.
Is that a pharmaceutical product?
It's 2 different pharmaceutical products that were prescribed together, routinely. And so, as I as I was looking around, 2 problems emerged. One was that my dad had been depending for his retirement on this Ridgecrest Herbals company that he had started some 8 years earlier. And so I said, sure, I'll step in and help with the operations. But given my background and given my mom's diagnosis, I'm saying to myself, look, if 2 FDA approved drugs taken together do this much damage, then how do I know that the drugs, that the products that we provide, which under traditional Chinese medicine would have been termed drugs, how do I know they're safe? How do I know they're effective? I wasn't as worried about the effective part because we had lots of testimonials from lots of people saying that they like those products. But how do I know they're safe? And as I dug into it, as litigators do, the first thing you do as a litigator is dive into the science and figure out how much of the science is coin operated and how much of it is real and could be depended on. The more I dug into medical science, the more I realized that we made a lot of assumptions back in the 20s and 30s that have not been re-examined. And as a result, we got on, as you said, this one disease, one target, one drug model. Monotherapy is what they call it in the medical literature. And it's just purely an assumption. It's a scientific simplification to make running the experiments easier. Let's assume that there is only one drug and it is being tested, and we try and control all of the other variables, and then we test that against a placebo. That's how we do our science today. But all of that is based on a 1925 cookbook by Ronald Fisher out of England, a major statistician. He designed the whole system, and we basically adopted it whole hog and said, this is the system that we're going to use from here on out. And the problem is science has come a long way since then.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it's changed a lot.
One of the big differences is in the world of statistics. Back in those days, Bayesian statistics was invented first. Bayesian statistics is a little more complicated, and the computation of it in particular is a lot more complicated. And so back in the 20s and 30s, we didn't have computers. It wasn't really practical. And so we came up with frequentist statistics as kind of a stopgap measure, as something that we could calculate. And basically, it makes a lot of assumptions that everybody involved in the experiment is the same, or that at least if you divide them into separate groups randomly, that those groups will be enough the same that you can make statistical calculations. And the problem is, we know now none of that is true. We've since sequenced the genome. We know that we share 98% of our genomic material with bonobos and chimps. But the part that makes us human, there's at least 4 to 5 million variables. And when you have that many variables and they're independent, that is, we all have different combinations. We're all members of the same genetic lotto, but we all have different numbers, right? And so as you look at that system, assuming that we're all going to get the same result out of any given medicine, frankly, it's just idiotic. So in traditional Chinese medicine and in Ayurvedic medicine, to a lesser degree in Arabic herbal medicine and European herbal medicine, they got away from that one disease, one target, one drug model thousands of years ago, at least 1,000 years ago. And what they did instead was adopt what we would call what we call at RidgeCrest a portfolio formulation, where, like your stockbroker, you don't put all your eggs in one basket. You don't put all of your money in one stock. You get a number of different things working on a problem in different directions. As a result, you can reduce the dosage of each of those individual things. That does two things for you. Number one, it means that when you use a smaller dose, if there's a chance that you're going to have a negative reaction to that thing, it's a smaller dose, and so the impact is smaller. But the second thing is, because there are more things in the mix, the chances that you're going to respond to one or more of them is higher. And so as a result, you get a more predictable result, you get a more a safer result. That's the way traditional herbal medicine approaches the problem. It's very different from what Western medicine is currently doing.
Remember when there's a restaurant chain out of Boston called Legal Seafoods, and I
Mhm.
remember that the owner of Legal Seafood at the time, he had gotten, I think, some form of cancer, and he started using Ayurvedic uh, treatments.
Mhm.
And he believed in it so much that he put a section on the menu of products made with Ayurvedic, intent. So
Interesting.
and, I don't know if they still do it, but they did it for a number of years, at least while he was still alive. But, yeah, it was interesting. And, I have a friend up the road whose, family is from, India, and that's how they produce what they do every day, and they don't, really, they don't seem to have problems, and they're all quite old.
Going all the way back to Louis Pasteur. Louis Pasteur originally kind of put forward the idea that germs were responsible for disease, right? And there was a big debate at the time because he said, no, the germs are responsible for the disease. And his principal rival, whose name I've forgotten now, um, basically said, no, it's the terrain, it's the defenses of the body that prevent us from getting sick. And that debate has been going on for hundreds of years.
Still going on.
Unfortunately, I think we in the United States take a very simplistic view that it's all about the germs and let's just kill all of the germs. Let God sort them out, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But over the last few years, we have come to discover that most of the microbes in our gut are not human. Our microbiome is responsible for most of our digestive uh, operations, and it's all bacteria that are good bacteria that live inside us all of the time. And about two-thirds of what's in our body is not human.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. You know, my wife and I have this conversation every once in a while because, we always talk about it in terms of our grandparents and my grandparents, my great-grandparents, my parents, and some of a lot of my family came from Italy, and they didn't use drugs. They never really got sick, and it was, like, there were
They did
certain
follow the
things.
Mediterranean diet, though. That was
Oh,
good.
yeah, that's absolutely well, that's what my point was gonna be. I can remember growing up. I grew up in the Bronx in an Italian section, and I can remember my family shopped, like my aunts and my grandmother, they shopped almost every day. They just went up and down the street. They bought, they figured out what they were gonna make for dinner, and that's what they made. And the refrigerators were smaller, the plates were smaller, things were smaller, and, but everything we didn't have processed food. Like, I didn't grow up with processed food. I can't remember my grandmother or my mother opening up a thing of deli meat. It just we didn't do it. Um, and I think that we've gotten so far into this processed food world, and I truly believe that processed food is part of the problem as to why we have so many health concerns. And then it becomes, okay, now we've created this problem, and then we develop a drug to fix the problem. And then the drug leads to a problem, which we then,
Never-ending
you know,
cycle. Goes around
and
and around.
and the other thing is, like, even when you go to other countries, and you see the same products on the shelf in other countries that are made by the same companies here, ketchup. You see it in Canada, it's a completely different label, and you see it in the UK, it's a completely different label. And we were in the cosmetics business, we were in the beauty business for a number of years early on, and, we sold worldwide, and we had to pick, a regulatory group that we wanted to go by because we wanted to be able to sell everywhere. So we went with the strictest one, which was in Europe. And of course, that made it okay in the US and made it okay in Canada and everywhere else. But, some of the things that they outlaw, we talk about today, like dyes, they outlawed dyes years ago, a lot of sugars and fake sugars and things like that. And I have, and I do struggle with with my weight all the time, and it always comes down to sugar. I have a terrible, terrible sugar addiction, and, whenever I break the sugar addiction, I lose weight. It's got nothing to do with everything else I eat, it's just the way my body does or does not process sugar correctly, and that's one of the reasons I don't really drink, because it doesn't work for me, because when you drink, your body turns that into sugar, and so, um, I think that processed sugar personally has a big impact on my health. I can feel it. If I don't have processed sugar in my diet for a month, and then you hand me a piece of cake, I wake up the next morning feeling like I spent the night in a bar. So,
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I we've all been graded on a curve, right? And that bell curve with the long tails is the keystone of statistics. When I was in business school, that was really my first exposure to statistics at all,
yeah,
and I just fell in love with it
yeah,
because I realized that it explains so much. Um,
I can see that.
that bell curve. There's a bell curve for almost everything. You want to measure the rate of hummingbird wing movements or heartbeats or whatever. There's a bell curve for it. In my case, I stand 6'5".
Jeez.
That puts me in the 1% of American men. I get on an airplane, I can look around. I'm taller than everybody except, maybe one guy or two guys in a plane full of 300 people, right? That means that plane seats are particularly uncomfortable
Yeah,
for me.
I was gonna say, that's gotta be tough.
And sometimes some weird things happen. I was sitting on a back seat on the window seat, and a guy came down the aisle. He's a big dude, my size, and he sits in the aisle seat. And then we see a guy bigger than either of the two of us walking down the aisle, and we say, "What do you bet the odds are that he's the seat between us?" Sure enough, right?
This happens. Yeah, yeah. Hey,
Sometimes random stuff is weird, but
well, I mean,
um, but
I
my
think
point is that when you're in that 1%, I can't buy stuff off the shelf in any store. I can't buy my shoes in any shoe store. I have to order it off the internet. Uh, these are daily battles that I have to deal with just because of my height. But you look at those 4 to 5 million variables in human beings, we all fall in those tails of that statistical curve for something. Some drug you want to take, maybe you overreact, maybe you underreact. That's going to be part of everybody's life. And when you think about it, if we're all randomly distributed across those variables, then that means that of those 4 to 5 million, 40 to 50,000, you're going to be in that 1% tail.
yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting that you talk about statistics, because I personally love statistics as well. I love numbers, and statistics play a big role in business, especially in marketing,
Yeah,
and who
absolutely.
you're targeting. Um, because like you can look at statistics, and so for example, startups. I know you do a lot of work with startups and entrepreneurs, but we always talk about, and I always talk about when I coach them, to find your ideal market, because you can't be everything to everybody. So you have to look at, again, the bell curve or whatever of who really statistically is going to be the target for your product, right? Because
Absolutely.
that's your addressable market. You can say, okay, I'll give you an example. I started a shaving brand many years ago, and you could argue, and people did, well, everybody shaves, men and women, and they shave. You're
Right.
100% correct. Everybody shaves, but the reality is our addressable market were guys and women, men and women between the ages of 28 and 45, because there we're coming out with a new razor, a different razor, a whole different approach. They're more easily convertible to something new. A guy that's over that, he's been using the same three-blade razor by Gillette for 15, 20 years. He's not going to change. It's going to be really difficult. And the guys under 28, they don't care yet about shaving because they're of that age. So, you have to build that addressable market, and that's all statistics and statistical analysis. And so, I agree. And I know you do a lot of work with startups and entrepreneurs and things like that, which I think is great to give back. Why don't you give us a little insight into what you're doing there for the next, we have about 5, 6
Sure,
minutes
happy
left.
to. So, yeah, when I when I moved up here to Salt Lake to work with my brother Greg, one of the first things he told me was, "There's this little startup accelerator. It's all volunteers, and you should get involved with this group." So I started volunteering for this group, and I've now been doing it for 27 years. And this accelerator is really kind of unique. They were founded in 1983, long before accelerators were a thing.
Yeah.
Y Combinator came along in 2005. Then everybody started talking about accelerators, but we were doing it a lot earlier, and we were doing it very differently. Most of the accelerators you look at are created by a group of investors
Yeah.
to attract deals to them.
Yep.
And so you go and you get all of the learning and the stuff they have to teach you, and then you go to demo day and you pitch to their investors.
Yep.
But are those the right investors for you? That's the golden question. The thing I always tell startups is you need to vet your investors at least as well as they vet you.
100%. I agree 100%. I try and coach if I do my job correctly, when I'm coaching someone to raise capital, I try and get them in the mindset and positioning that you're going in there with a deal that they can't turn down. So don't go in there like a beggar begging for money from a VC, because that's going to put you in a bad position. And don't be afraid to ask questions. So many entrepreneurs, so many startups, so many guys, founders walk into the room and they're afraid to ask the question. I said, you need to start asking the question, what can you do to help me? If I take your money, how are you going to help me expand this brand? Because they become your partner. So I agree 100%.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so important. There's, we we talk about it in the industry as smart money and dumb money.
Yeah, exactly.
Smart money is the money that can help you get your goals accomplished.
Yep.
Dumb money just gets in your way. It
Yeah.
clutters
Dumb
up your
money
cap
just
table, and it makes your life miserable.
Yeah, dumb
That's
money is
all.
just gonna ask you for your income statement and balance sheet at the end of every month, and they're not gonna help you in any way. And it's bad, and I've made that mistake a couple of times in my life. Well, I made that mistake once in my life, and I said never again, but, never say never. I might
Yeah.
make that dumb mistake again. Uh,
Well, it's interesting. When you look at startups, one of the first piece of advice we always give them is make sure that you have tested your idea with actual customers,
yeah,
that you've got the traction that you need before you ever even go into the investors.
yeah.
A lot of entrepreneurs, especially first timers, have this idea that investors are fond of risk. No.
No.
No, they will do anything they can do to avoid it, and they're counting on you to eliminate that market risk before they put their money in. They want to scale up your business, not prove it out.
Yeah. 100 yeah, no question. And I think the other thing that gets confused with young startups and entrepreneurs is the difference between having your minimum viable product and having your product market fit. Because minimum viable product does not give you product market fit. That just is the minimum idea, or the minimum example of what you're trying to build that you're going to share with people. But when you have product market fit, that you want to talk about people buying your product, who came and bought again.
Yes,
So, yeah.
and who are excited about it because it really solves a problem for
Yeah,
them.
exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. And one of the frustrations is that, in the medical industry, we have basically said, "No, we're gonna put the government first. The government has to decide whether this product is safe and effective," and those are 2 very, very different questions.
Yeah, yeah.
But, but we're gonna rely on the government to determine that for us, and as a result, for example, in drugs now, it takes $2.2 billion to bring a drug to market. It takes 10 to 14 years out of a 20-year patent life. You know, uh, it violates every rule that we teach to startups, and then we wonder why medicine isn't advancing as quickly as computers are, for example.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. What's interesting to me is, the growth of the GLP-1s that, suddenly within 2 years, they're everywhere. Now we're advertising them on TV, so easy to get. We've got digital medicine that you can get on there and speak to a digital doctor and get a prescription and then but they haven't really been. And now all of a sudden I saw the other day that one of the weight loss drugs, I can't remember which one, um, Zepbound, I think, they're now promoting it as solving sleep apnea. So is it a GLP-1 weight loss drug or is it for sleep apnea? I mean, so, there's a little confusion there, but now they've made GLP-1 pills. And so now you've got Serena Williams out there talking about it. But everybody that I know that got on the, GLP-1s, whether it's Ozempic or whether it's, Zepbound or whatever, they all got on it. They lost a ton of muscle. They lost weight because they lost muscle. And then as soon as they stopped, they began to gain the weight back again. And it didn't really solve the problem because the problem, you have to figure out what the issue is as to why you're overeating, right? Like for me, I know what my issue is. It's sugar. I have a sugar addiction. Once I cut that out, I'm perfectly fine. But it's an addiction like anything else. I don't care what anybody says. It's very difficult for me to give up sugar. And we have to basically clear the house of having it.
But you're absolutely right. We need to be looking at the root cause of the problem, not discussing the symptoms.
Yeah.
And that's the real issue. Um, we spend way too much time talking about symptoms and controlling symptoms. And part of that, it's what Abraham Maslow used to call, uh, Abraham Maslow was a psychologist back in the
Yeah.
60s, wrote some really
Hierarchy of
powerful
needs.
books. But
Yeah.
one of the things he said was that a guy with a hammer in his hand thinks everything's a nail.
Yeah.
And we see that with entrepreneurs all the time, right? I'm selling XYZ and XYZ is good for everything.
Yeah.
No, it isn't. Come on.
Yeah.
We've
Hey,
heard that story before.
that's true.
Yeah.
Matt, it was a good conversation. The time went by too quick. We're down to about our last minute.
Wow.
So if you could, anything to wrap up, any last parting words?
Just, I when it comes to health, I think everybody needs to be their own best advocate.
Yeah, I would agree.
Um, get the smartest advice you can, but make sure that you're reasoning it through and seeing whether it makes sense for you in your situation, because we all have those differences and we need to be able to deal with those. That means we need options.
Yeah.
That means that government can't decide what's best for everybody in healthcare. It, the standard of care, it's a meaningless concept. We all need different solutions.
Yeah. 100%.
Anyway,
100%. And thanks, Matt, for coming on and sharing the reality of what you do and how you think. And I love the
been fun.
authenticity of it all. I love the fact that you're very authentic in what you talk about. And if everybody, make sure you check out RidgeCrest Herbals, look into the work they're doing. And if you just Google Matt, I mean, you find some interesting stuff. He's if you're an entrepreneur, and take a look at what he's doing. And yeah, thanks again, Matt, for coming on, and I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Bye. Bye.
Take care.